right after lunch, and every time right after lunch, it's trying to get that energy level back up into an appropriate level. So let me just get this thing in. So, can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay, so let's start off with two pictures. I like starting off with a definition of what are threats and what are risks, because this applies to the topic we're talking about, the emergence of the so-called i-Soc, or Interactive Security Operations Center. And part of the reason for that is that the definition of insanity is that we keep on doing the same thing and basically accept or expect a different outcome. We see the same thing going on in a lot of different security technologies out there today. We're still depending on a lot of the old stuff, like firewalls, antivirus, and these things. And a lot of folks are asking the questions of, okay, well, why isn't this working? So let me start off and attempt to do that. So anyone in the crowd, can you tell me if this is a threat or a risk?
Risk.
Risk? Why is it a risk?
Because the risk can give his life. They can picture of an animal.
Okay, then let me just go to the next one real quick. Is this one a risk or a threat?
Threat.
It's a threat. Okay, interesting. Never had that one before. So this is actually a threat, and I'll explain why. Before this happens from a bigger distance, it would be a risk, but it's a threat because it's just about to happen. If we take a look at the picture, we have someone focusing in on the camera. He's taking a picture of his life, or so he thinks. And while he's taking this picture, he doesn't understand the reality and his environment around him. So while he's focusing on the picture, this animal is racing toward him, and within a matter of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, the thing is going to knock him on his butt. So the reason why this is a threat is because it's time relevant and it's just about to happen. The other reason why this is an interpretation of a threat is because the environment around him, the picture is very limited. We only see something right in front of him. Okay. The types of information that we collect on this picture are also finite, meaning we know what types of information we need to collect to identify if he's going to get knocked or not. He has to move away because this thing is racing towards him. If he doesn't move away, he gets knocked down. So the reason why he knows it's going to happen, hopefully, is because he looks in his camera and he sees this thing rushing towards him. So this is actually a risk for a specific reason. Now, if we take a look at this picture, we have a bridge, we have a cliff, we have water, and we have different types of threats, and I'll explain why. Right over here in the beginning, we have a cliff, so if we don't watch our step, we can fall off the cliff, right? Obviously a threat, because it then happens. If we continue to walk across the bridge, we see that there's wooden planks that are hanging down before we actually reach the end of the bridge. So before we reach the end of the bridge, we can fall out through the bridge, because the wooden planks could be damaged, and there's a hole somewhere, and if we don't watch it, we fall down. The last piece is, if we keep on going towards the end, obviously we'll fall off the bridge, right? So the reason why this is an example of a risk is because we're zoomed out in our perspective. The context of the information that we're collecting is different. So we have multiple threats: falling off the cliff, falling through the boards, falling off the bridge, right? And we have this situation that we can see and avoid. So the likelihood of us falling off the cliff is higher if we don't watch it. The likelihood of us falling off the bridge is high if we keep on going, but we can control this, right? Different types of information, not the standardized pieces of information that we're used to, because we have to think about what we're looking at and why it's relevant. What's the context? Make sense? Yeah? Okay. So if we take a look at the same thing and transpose that into what i-Socs do and what types of threats that we have out there, we see a different picture today. What we're seeing is that cyber espionage and warfare influences the different types of attacks that we see in reality. That means the old script kiddies and hackers that did a specific job at breaking into a system have now changed to very highly sophisticated, highly trained people that leverage an intelligence life cycle that collect information in different ways, shapes, and forms in order to do something or to attack a target or reach a goal. This vital point means that the types of things that we need to pay attention to are different, or need to be different. If we take a look at why this happens, one of the biggest reasons of recent attacks go back to what we call hybrid warfare. In the Munich report back in 2016, I believe it was, we talked about a new type of warfare that was emerging. And back in 2016, nobody knew actually how right they were. We have on this diagram hybrid warfare, the definition. We have different areas that we know from classical warfare, but we also have new ones. So if we take a look at things like informational warfare and propaganda, we have the elections in 2016, Trump. People bought services on Facebook and Twitter and shot out information that was not true, fake news, right? But this then influenced the next step, diplomacy. It influenced who became the next president, we think. Mm-hmm. Is all the evidence there? It's not conclusive yet, but the indicators are very well there, right? So other things like, for instance, cyber attacks we know, economic warfare and cyber special forces are the things that are creating more issues for us in the way we train people, the way we focus on security, and the way we use mechanisms and invest in defenses for security, right? The threat actors change, we have to change too, right? An example of this in real life is what we found about a month ago called Operation I Has Coins. Does anybody know what cryptocurrency is? Mm-hmm. Does anybody invest in cryptocurrency? Mm-hmm. Is anybody honest enough to say if they have a mining rig at home? Really? You know mining rigs? Really? Okay. Well, I do have multiple mining rigs because for various different reasons. I like bitcoins, but not because I'm buying illegal stuff. I like understanding how systems work. So in Operations I Has Coins, we found out that the attack vectors happened similarly to CEO fraud. We had different types of threat actors that were looking at, through phishing attacks and specific other types of attacks, to get access to mining rigs so they could process transactions to finance illegal activities. An example of this in real life was a few months ago in Ukraine. An entire mining building was taken apart. And what they found was, through the transactions in the cryptocurrencies, is that they were using this mining to finance activities, illegal activities in eastern Ukraine, Russia. Again, 100% conclusive it isn't, but you can guess where that's coming from, right? So what does this mean? The different types of ways that we do attacks, the different types of ways in which we have to use technology will always emerge into newer attacks that we need to pay attention to, need to analyze, and need to protect ourselves against. So another point of this crypto hacking is that you can send a contract to calculate something, a number. In reality, you can embed code in this transaction to then do something, like for instance crack a password or do something else. What a lot of people don't realize is that in forensics, in order for you to crack a password, you need the same hardware as you do for cryptocurrency mining. Wow, interesting. So if you manage to circumvent the system, you can use the same thing to crack someone's password, and you won't even know. You're thinking you're getting bitcoins, but in reality someone just got their password hacked, right? Interesting. So I'm not going to get into this because we don't have that much time. We can do this afterwards. All we're basically saying here is that threats and risks are linked. This goes back to science, quantum physics, string theory. Things are connected to each other. We found the same thing applies to threats and risks. A threat and risk that you find is always related to something else. If you don't understand that, then the mechanisms and the way you approach security will ultimately fail, right? Recognize reality. We'll get to this in some more detail later after the discussion. So in risk intelligence, we're looking at different things. We're looking at information that's not standardized. That means we need to assume that what we're looking for is somewhere someone doesn't want us to find it. Information like threat actors in the darknet, in the clearnet, what websites, how do you monitor that? How do you track that? Covert espionage-based attacks, how do you find that information? How do you find those signatures? How do you find those clues? Forensics. Unknown vulnerabilities, possible exploits, that type of information. And a whole list of other things is what we collect in the solutions that we're working on, right? We want to change that landscape. And then predict where these types of attacks happen to these classical types of resources. Make sense? Yeah? Cool? Yes? No? Okay, so how does that fit into the i-Soc puzzle? So we have in the i-Soc our classical basic functions, which are led back to ITIL and those different types of sub-processes. We have things like log management, we have proactive monitoring, we have incident problem management, event correlation, change and risk management, and a whole bunch of other stuff that rests on technology with APIs, agents, logs, and other types of data. Then we have functions in the back like the SIEM dashboard, penetration testing, assessments, and vulnerability management reports. These are basic info and alerts that we use. In the next process, we then have the data collection. So we're collecting information from different sources, and that's also starting to change, right? For instance, here on the top, we have OSINT. OSINT was a subject that only folks in the intelligence industry actually knew about previously, and now are starting to learn about, right? So people talk about threat intelligence, they're forgetting the intelligence lifecycle, right? So different types of information. So here the SOC is changing again. And then the last change, which adds the most value in our opinion, is the piece where we're talking about proactive, predictive risk intelligence. So the security posture plus any type of status relevant information in a dashboard that's easy to understand and digest, and also export when you need it, right? So this is where the intelligence and the value actually happens for newer i-Socs. We're no longer depending on ITIL, processes and procedures, just on those things for security or antivirus and firewalls. We're now having to think proactively and predictively, right? Probabilistic based risk analysis, right? So some of the ways that we do that, and there are other guys, other folks here that do it in similar ways, is we basically collect information on the bottom of different types of risk types, collect that into a system, and also different points within the infrastructure,